Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
So today is Wednesday, October 29th, and what's going on out there? Can you recap us with the biggest story or what you've been thinking about?
The biggest story. I don't know exactly what the biggest story is, but yeah, let's start. We'll start with Gaza and the so-called Gaza ceasefire. Um, the Israelis have once again declared that Hamas has violated the ceasefire, and they carried out significant strikes. We're talking some really heavy bombardment of Gaza, resulting in 104 deaths, approximately 40 of whom were children, 20 women. So anyway, kind of a typical day, pre-ceasefire day, and though was happening during the so-called ceasefire. What was their justification for this? They said that some of their soldiers were attacked in Rafah. No one was killed, but bullets flew, and they blamed it on Hamas. Hamas said that they have no idea, what happened. They just don't have any presence down there. Anybody who's down there, even if they're their own soldiers, they're not in communication with the leadership, which is certainly believable. Again, it's we know what the conditions are in Gaza. And then if in fact this incident occurred, and we don't even know if it did, we're just depending on the IDF. Okay, but let's say that some incident occurred and shots were fired. It could have been Islamic Jihad. It could have been some other group. Who knows? It could have been a false flag. Again, the Israelis have created a lot of these militias out of, from criminals within Gaza, and could have used them. We don't know. But in any case, look, nobody died. Nobody died. Israel responded, with this heavy bombardment, resulting in the deaths of 104. One other excuse that they gave was concerned the return of partial remains of one of the hostages. And that was somebody. Actually, like most of the body had been returned earlier, actually in pieces. And this was, I don't know, we don't have to know what, maybe it was a limb or something like that, that Hamas found and returned. Now, Israel says that they have footage of Hamas actually taking this partial remains and burying it in a place, and then alerting some international organization like the Red Cross or the Red Crescent to the site. And so that may be true. Maybe Hamas engaged in some kind of deception. But why? In fact, if it was something, a body that had been largely returned earlier, why didn't they even bother to return more of it? They didn't have to. Nobody would have asked them for it.
Is this footage public where they say we have footage?
I haven't seen it. We're just told. But the thing is that in itself, I don't see how that's a violation. And then they put a certain spin on it that shows that Hamas is playing games with us and has all the remains and not returning. It doesn't show that. It's not clear if in fact this happened. It's not clear, why they did that. But it wasn't a violation. Yet, the IDF seized on it. And this is part of a pattern. It's just like what we said. This is a ceasefire that's really kind of a one-way ceasefire. It's a ceasefire in the sense that, okay, Israel's not killing 100 people every day. They just do it every once in a while. And on the slow days, they kill a few people. And that's the way it's been. So, before this most recent attack by Israel, nearly 100 had been killed during the ceasefire, after the ceasefire had been declared in Gaza. So now we're up to something like 200. And this is what's going to go on. This is clearly, a very one-sided ceasefire like the one that we have in Lebanon. Again, overseen by the U.S., but the U.S. is, Donald Trump recently declared, he said that, okay, yeah, Israel has the right to respond. Well, why doesn't Hamas have the right to respond? Again, there have been dozens of ceasefire violations by Israel, and there's just nothing, no comment on that. You never hear anything from the Trump administration or any of the the others. I haven't heard anything from any other so-called guarantor or or any of the states that were involved in bringing about the ceasefire. So that's what we're going to continue to see, and I think that's Israel finds this very comfortable. They can go ahead. Another thing that I need to add is not just that they carried out these strikes, but Israel is planning, or at least Netanyahu has instructed the IDF to take more of Gaza as kind of a punishment for this. They already have 58% of it. They say you just move in and you can take some more of it. In other words, like move the yellow line, farther in some places.
So would you say that the ceasefire is it's done? Or do you think this is a one-off bombing and then we're going to go back to
I think this is, yeah. I think this is just a pattern. This is what we're going to see. And Israel will be fine with doing this for months, if not years. Now, the thing is like and we'll see, Netanyahu has to deal with the people who want to settle Gaza. And he might be able to satisfy them too. He said, let them settle, on the Israeli side of the yellow line or something. That should lead to a lot of protests, but who knows? The Americans and others may just let them get away with that. And if that's fine, I think Netanyahu could say, great, this so-called ceasefire is wonderful. We have more than half of Gaza, and then we can bomb them whenever we want. And that may be the way it is for a long, long time. Again, this is something that we have seen not just in Gaza or Lebanon, but you could also say the West Bank. This is something that Israel does. It's just that in the case of the West Bank, they haven't declared annexation. And there's actually been to their benefit because they say, oh, we have this peace process going on. Don't interfere with the peace process. We need to. But while the peace process, so-called, has gone on for nearly 60 years in the case of the West Bank, Israel has been taking, every day, just virtually every day. And recently, I think you could say every day, has been taking land and squeezing the Palestinians, driving them from their villages, cutting down their olive trees, killing their herds, shooting at them, detaining their children. This goes on constantly. And they can say, well, we're not, you can't accuse us of being apartheid because this is not really our land. We have this peace process, and maybe somewhere down the road we can actually, if we can come to a negotiated solution, then, this will become Palestinian land. But of course, it's absurd. Everybody sees what's been happening, again, for well over 50 years, this has been happening. But it provides a veneer. So that's why you have, I think, previous administrations and even this administration has actually said told the Israelis don't officially annex the West Bank. That's again, they're fine. Just like they're fine if we have a so-called ceasefire, which you can violate whenever you want to, and we're fine if you don't officially annex the West Bank and you declare yourself open to some sort of form of negotiation. That way, we can just keep on kicking the can on down the road, and you de facto can annex it. Now, I guess there are some. Maybe I think it's possible that they just might even throw aside the veneer of a peace process and officially annex it. Maybe at the end of Trump's term, he'll just do that. He'll make good on his promise to Miriam Adelson. There are, increasingly impatient people within Israel that do want to go ahead and annex that land, but I think even Netanyahu understands that it's actually to his advantage to say officially we're not doing that. And, again, the Europeans and the Americans, everybody's happy with that. And they don't care if you are constantly, again, like in the case of the West Bank, just de facto annexing the land. They can look the other way and pretend. But officially, this isn't happening. And officially, maybe one day we'll have a two-state solution.
Do you think that this strategy will continue to work, at least for Gaza, that they'll be get away with this? Because I understand that this might have worked in the past, but since October 7th, so many eyes are on Gaza. Perhaps the West Bank is a different story because people really don't, a lot of people that have just kind of discovered the whole Israel-Palestine conflict maybe are just solely invested in Gaza. But if you have this ceasefire they so-called ceasefire, and they say Israel can violate when you want, maybe that worked in the past, when people weren't paying so close attention. But now, do you think it will? I mean, just the sense of impunity that Israel acts with, I think, is a big slap in the face for so many people, because we've been watching this conflict for 2 years. Not this conflict, this genocide, right? And you said that their excuse was no IDF soldier was killed, that they said someone was shot at, no real evidence provided. We don't know who did it. Then some shenanigans with the remains of a body. We don't know. They said they had footage of Hamas like planting a limb or something or whatever, but they don't provide the footage, so we don't know. We can't see. I haven't seen it. Maybe it is out there. And then their response is that we were going to just bomb. Who did they bomb exactly? What was the intended target?
Well, there were many targets. And again, the IDF declared we killed 30 terrorists, but the health authorities in Gaza said there were 104 killed, and approximately 40 of whom were children, and then another 20 were women. And if it's anything like previous Israeli bombings, we can be sure that the great majority are civilians.
Right. I mean, I just saw on X right before we started this, Marjorie Taylor Greene posting about it, saying how Israel broke the ceasefire and killed all these. She said 46 children. Said 46 children. Okay. She's like, this is a war crime. So you have prominent politicians on the right that are saying this. So I just don't know if this strategy will work. I understand how it worked for them so well since 1967. They've been just slowly taking land. I mean, really since 1948. But I mean, we've seen that process and they got away with it. But do you think that it's a different environment now? And can they?
It is a different environment, but unfortunately, the governments have not changed their position, and they're happy with these arrangements like they were in the past, and they will continue to wink, wink, and look the other way.
Yeah, but they're beholden to us now, right? To some extent, you see the dissent, the anger amongst the population. So many people, like I said, are going to become single issue voters. Like, hey, are you taking money for AIPAC? Are you Israel first? And if that starts to happen, give me some hope is what I'm saying.
No, I have some hope. That's the silver lining to this very, very dark cloud, that there has been an awakening. And we have seen, it's not just a few politicians. There always have been a few politicians, who have on both sides of the aisle. It used to be now, like support for Zionism is clearly stronger within the Republican Party. That wasn't always true. It used to be, if anything, it was stronger among the Democrats. But by and large, you have bipartisan support, and it's always been true. There have always been a few dissidents, but they've always been in single digits. But what we see that's different is within the general public, and hopefully that will be reflected in let's say the upcoming the midterm elections. Again, I think that like the Mamdani, that case is actually could be a real bellwether. It's it tells us what may lie ahead, as he has. I don't really know about him if in the end he's going to carry through. And make good on some of his promises. Of course, he's not a mayor. He's just going to be a mayor if he succeeds. He doesn't have, real input into foreign policy. Yet this is, I think, symbolically very important. And again, as maybe an indication of what's to come. He has actually, maintained his very strong anti-Zionist position, and his opponents like Andrew Cuomo have gone after him on that, because that's and I think what he understands that there is a new reality, and his opponents don't understand that, because in the past you say, oh, this man is an enemy of Israel, and in New York, okay, curtains, it's all over. There's no way you've been declared an enemy of Israel. And you'll dig up some quote, where he really slammed Israel and Zionism. It's not working. It's not working. And actually, this is probably what catapulted him to the front, was that he was anti-Israel. People are frustrated. So, again, whoever's mayor of New York, I don't say that doesn't matter, but, again, he doesn't have a direct say in the making of foreign policy. But maybe we'll see that played out in dozens of other districts, around the country. And we'll begin to see, the beginning of a shift, something that a reflection of actually the popular will. Maybe again I'm being naive, but I certainly hope for it. I think there's reason to be cautiously hopeful.
Okay, well, then where do you see this going just in the near to medium term? You think that Israel will just get away with this, that every couple of weeks we should just expect them to, do a massive bombing campaign and kill 100 people, mostly civilians? Then in between, they'll just be killing 2 or 3 a day, just like that?
Okay.
Actually,
Doge. Let me just close the door real quick.
Yeah, no worries.
Hey, Doge, take it easy. Yeah, I'm afraid that that's what we can expect, that's what's going to happen. And the same things will continue to happen in the West Bank and in Lebanon. Again, Israel acts as if there are no consequences for its actions, and there aren't in these cases. They've been violating the Lebanese ceasefire for nearly a year, and they've constantly, undermined the so-called peace process, again, for decades in the West Bank. Again, the difference is that I think a lot of people are paying attention. Even the West Bank, there's some horrifying footage that's come out recently. And that it's come out in large part because of the Israelis themselves. Just like in Gaza, you have these, I guess the sense of impunity is such as that they celebrate, the horrible things that they inflict upon the Palestinian population there. They take selfies after they've beaten up a grandma or something, that kind of stuff. But people are seeing it. It's getting through in a way that it never did before. So again, we don't see anything really at the government level, or very, very little. But the support for Israel continues to be undermined, and it's I think that's going to maybe we won't see anything significant. I'm certainly hoping that we will in the upcoming midterm elections. But no matter what, eventually that has to have negative consequences for Israel and Zionism.
Is there's media and more equipment and stuff being allowed into Gaza? Are we seeing any type of? No. What about? Do we know anything? Any updates on them just being able to clean up and restore some basic facilities, or are we getting a better casualty count? Anything like this?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, the Gazans are digging some bodies out. So, recently, I would look at the casualty counts, the kill counts, and it might be just a couple. There might have been just in some days only 2 or 3, or maybe even 1 directly killed by the Israelis on that day. But then they would get at least a similar number of bodies out of the wreckage. But they're just doing it, by hand with shovels. And they are not being provided with equipment to actually search for Palestinian bodies. They have been provided some equipment to search for Israeli bodies. That's what's happened. So again, there's much more. Apparently these, even among the dead, the Israeli remains are worth a lot more than Palestinian remains. As for the press, no, international press still are not being allowed in there. There was some sort of court ruling that extended, the government is trying to keep them out. And Israel has a independent, maybe not quite so independent as it once was, but a relatively independent judiciary. Netanyahu is working to undermine it. But anyway, the court recently extended the ban on international press by another 30 days. So we're still waiting to get the press in there. And we're still waiting, Gaza is still waiting to get all kinds of things, not just more food. They're getting some food, but they're just still, so many people are on the brink of starvation. So many are suffering from malnutrition. I I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's like this problem hasn't gone away. It was somewhat relieved by, when that 2 months of no food finally came to an end. So there is a certain amount of food getting in, but not nearly as much as had been promised by the ceasefire. And again, medicine and medical supplies of all kinds, and medical equipment to replace the medical equipment that was restored. So many doctors have been killed. I think it's a total of 1,700 medical personnel have been killed by Israel over the last 2 years. And so there's still,
crazy.
it's still there. The only thing you can say is that like the daily kill count has gone down significantly, except for recently, because of this, of the bombings. But that has been called off. And so we can say the kill count has gone down, but almost everything else has remained the same.
So you would say that the genocide is ongoing. It's slowed. It's just, but or we say we are on a pause, and then what can we expect? Do you think there will be a full on resumption where they try to exterminate what's left? Or
it's a possibility. Again, there clearly are, very powerful people in Israel that have Netanyahu's ear, and I think Netanyahu is. I think, it's not just that he needs to accommodate them. I think he probably, he is with them in his thinking and his goals too. Again, we always mention the ears of Ben Gvir and Smotrich. They're kind of the two most powerful, influential figures on the extremist wing of Netanyahu's coalition, but there are many of them, and they are angry. They do want just a full resumption of the genocide and of the ethnic cleansing, and they are rather impatient right now. And so they could eventually have their way. That's always a possibility. They're there. In the meantime, you can say like the conditions. There's not with the exception of just the past couple of days, we haven't had. Significant, anything significant, you just kill a couple people a day or whatever. Anywhere else in the world, they say like, what the heck is going on? But, compared to what's happened in the past, it seems insignificant. But everything else, like I say, the conditions are miserable. Again, just like, and there's so many people, for example, that are in need of acute medical care and they can't get it in Gaza, and they're not being let out to hospitals, let's say in Egypt, as they would have been in the past. In the end, I think you could still call it genocidal because it's going to, I think it is resulting in death. When you bomb all the hospitals and people only have like 2% of their regular water supply, people are going to get sick. They're going to die sooner. And at some point, we're going to start to get a sense of the scale of the deaths there. And we just don't know now, again, I think because Gaza is essentially destroyed and so many of these institutions that would keep track of these things are in chaos and have very limited resources.
It's just so unbelievable that this is happening in our timeline when we're supposedly so enlightened and humanitarian or whatever it is that we purport to be. It's just insane to think that there's this captive population, and you just think about it's like half children. So many kids live here too, and they're just walled in. And it's just insane that that's even a thing. And then they destroy the whole thing, just bombs, just terror. I watched a movie, or I watched the first half. It was called Warfare, because I wanted to see kind of like what a modern American war movie was about, kind of the perspective. And it was set in Iraq, but they were showing. It's actually, I think, considered an anti-war movie, because what it does is it just shows just the absolute horror of war, where these soldiers, they get hit, and then just the pain and the screaming and suffering. It's very visceral. And I just can't help but think when I'm seeing that, it's like what the people of Gaza have been going through every day for 2 years. And I'm feeling shocked just watching a dramatization of soldiers that are in a country they shouldn't even be in, having this happen to them. And it's horrific. And you just think these kids, these civilians, you destroy Gaza. It's just complete level, just the amount of pain, suffering, agony there. And then nobody's allowed to leave. Nothing's allowed to come in. And then they're just said, you're stuck here. We'll keep on shooting at you occasionally, and you just have to live in the rubble. We won't give you anything to kind of restore any semblance of society or civilization. It's just unbelievable. It's just so horrific. I can't think of anything like this in history where you've done something like this, right? Is there any parallel where we've had something that's you just telling me this? It makes me angry. It makes me It's just I can't believe it. I don't understand that.
Yeah, well, there certainly have been genocides in the past, when one kingdom pretty much completely wiped out another.
Right, but this is a captive. People used to, invading armies come in and you can flee, you can run, you can fight back. There's some, maybe not parody, but it's awful, of course. But this is like, they're just born and trapped.
Right, It seems particularly sadistic because Israel has total control. You could have, in some cases, like in these wars, there's a fear that if we don't wipe them out, they're going to wipe us out. I guess there are Israelis that think that way, but it's ridiculous in the case of this very small, captive population, that living in the rubble. You have total control. You have the world's, superpower at your back, and this is what you've done to them. It's not just like in like in the course of a single war, in a war, I think people become naturally unhinged and they let's say achieve emotional states that are not normal for them, and they do commit all kinds of crimes and kill civilians when that's something they wouldn't do normally. But this is something that's been going on. It's very deliberate, very calculated, very cold. It's been going on for a long, long time. It's just like prior to October 7th, they regularly, would cut out like no more toys. What kind of people do that? Stop and say, we're going to deprive them of toys, this year for the kids, or we're going to cut out macaroni or, pasta or something. These are decisions that the Israelis made. And they've done these kind of things for years. It's sadistic. It's true. And I don't know if there is if we can find something equivalent in history. I'm just not sure, that we can. I don't think we can.
The more that people wake up and hear about this stuff, the backlash coming for Israel has to be huge. And the fact that they behave this way when they're completely relying on the United States is what's so insane. And so I feel like there's a real fear, though, amongst the Zionists, and they understand that. That's why, because the backlash is happening. It's coming. Just through conversations like this, everyone is understanding. I mean, you telling me about this stuff, it's got me all worked up now. I'm angry. And so that the millions of people are furious. Billions probably now are getting worked up and getting angry about this. It's got to blow somehow. Where do you see it going?
Yeah. Yeah, again, it comes down to the U.S. I mean, it's really the U.S. is the one country that can make a difference. And because the U.S. is an unconditional backer of Israel, that really does prevent other countries from forcibly intervening, or causes them to, to hesitate and choose not to intervene. But it's the U.S. that can make the difference. And so what happens, I think if we're looking for an end to Zionism, we're not going to find it in Israel. It looks like they're just on the self-destructive course. The extremists are winning out. That's the trend there. But in this country, the trend is going in the other direction. And I think eventually, I just hope it's sooner rather than later. These things can take a while, unfortunately, but we occasionally are pleasantly surprised. Things can happen sometimes faster than we expect. But eventually, whenever it happens, the U.S. support, this unconditional support for Zionism, I believe, will end in the U.S.
And do you feel like this is happening rapidly? Because I feel that, but maybe I'm wrong. But I see it. Like I was talking to you before this, that I watched Nick Fuentes on Tucker Carlson. I don't really know much about Nick Fuentes, but I just heard of him as this extremist, anti-Semite, the king of anti-Semites. And he's here on Tucker Carlson, and it was actually a great interview. I enjoyed it. I recommend everybody listen to it. But and then the other thing I listened to was Candace Owens. And the reasons I've been listening to these things is because when I go on X, I see so many Zionists attacking both of these people, so that I felt like, okay, well, I have to see what this is about. And then when I go down there, I'm like, hey, this is a reasonable position. And then you start to go down. I just wonder if, and I see how many views they're getting, millions of views. So I'm just thinking like, in my mind, I feel like the dam is broken, but maybe it hasn't.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just in my bubble.
Well, I think that the dam has broken in a sense, on within public opinion. And again, it's, that's just not your, that's not because you're seeing things within your bubble. Again, the public opinion polls are showing that. There has been a dramatic shift. And I guess in that way, I say, yeah, things are happening faster than I expected. Now, when it comes to policy and the people that actually make the decisions and, that decide to continue to send arms to Israel and provide them with diplomatic cover and all that, unfortunately, we don't see the change. Like even with the Congress, yeah, there has been some movement, but it's still at the fringes. It's glacial in comparison. But I think it's just, again, that's something that they do have to reckon with in the long run. And maybe we could go different routes. It's just maybe there's enough democracy left in this country that dramatic shift, that really rapid shift that we're finding in public opinion will be reflected within the Congress and eventually the presidency. Maybe that'll happen. I'm not going to say it can't. It certainly can. I think, again, there's that case of Mamdani. That's something to watch closely. But another possibility is that we could see a shift towards authoritarianism, like I think we are seeing in Europe. It's like, okay, wait a second, the people are not obeying us. The people are actually starting to question some of our sacred principles. What are we going to do? Well, let's suppress the parties that they support, or ban them or outright or whatever. And we're seeing that happen, right? That's happening in Europe, and with the support of the European Commission. And maybe we'll see something similar in the U.S. too. It's just like there will be, it's just like the Zionists realize they lost the battle for public opinion, so they just turn to those. To the rulers, to the political elite with whom they've been so close all these decades, and say, to save democracy and to save Zionism, you need to do something radical and maybe extra constitutional here. We could see that happen too.
I feel like we've been doing a lot of that stuff already, but the problem is it doesn't work. I mean, we see them, deporting college students and cracking down on free speech. We see, Netanyahu just basically saying we got to buy TikTok and X. And then what happened? TikTok got purchased by Larry Ellison. Okay, I know these are private, whatever, but we know the backing of the deep state and everything. But and then also on X, the algorithm changed, shortly thereafter, and everybody was commenting on it, saying like, why is my feed just full of pro-Zionist BS?
Yeah.
And it got to the point where Elon Musk had to address it. He's like, oh yes, there seems to be something a little off. We're looking into it. And then you see all the top comments, and it's like, oh, does this thing that has to do it? Is this bug that you're noticing? Is it an Israeli bug? Does it speak Hebrew? That's what all the top comments are. It's like everybody knows. So it just, I feel like I just feel like Pandora's box has been opened for them, and the genie's out of the bottle. I don't think they can get it back in. And so, that's why it just amazes me when you say how they just violate these ceasefires. It's like they have no self-awareness. I was expecting a violation of the ceasefire, but with Gaza, I was expecting there to be more of a false flag. But here it's like they didn't even try, it seems like. Just like, oh, somebody was shot out. We already killed dozens and dozens of Palestinians since the ceasefire. Nothing happened. And we said some soldier was shot at. And now we're going to just, kill 46 children? It's insanity. It's like, it's such a slap in the face to Trump as well, and to Vance. You see that.
Okay, but actually Trump is fine with it. That's what he said. He's fine with it.
I mean,
so
he
Vance
says
or whatever.
Right. Well, because I think he just has to spin it.
He just wants the ceasefire to remain in name. That's all. He doesn't care if, again, he's empowered. He's essentially authorized the Israelis to kill Palestinians whenever they feel the need to.
Right, but he knows every time that they do that. I mean, obviously, he would prefer if they didn't, right? Because it creates these
I don't know.
uncomfortable questions for him. Like, hey,
Yeah.
why did Israel do this? Is ceasefire broken? It sounds like Netanyahu doesn't respect you, and that people are questioning that. And so maybe he just did this on the one off, but let's see what happens. The next time, the time after, you're going to still just keep on saying that, oh yeah, Israel's listening to us. And in my sense, there's always this question: does the U.S. control Israel? Does Israel control the United States? When I see this type of stuff, I wonder, like, why are we even asking this question? It seems to me it's clear that Israel controls the United States. Everyone wants to think, and I know it's more complex because Zionist interests are deeply intertwined within the United States and the deep state and the neocons. There's a lot of overlap. But in general, when it comes at a head, it seems like Israel gets the say.
Yeah. Right. I think that's that's what I believe. Essentially, the tail wags the dog, and we have John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs. They a lot of leading thinkers within the dissident community agree with that. I'm in that camp. Now it's not entirely 100%. I think actually Trump has exerted more influence and has had his way more often than almost any recent U.S. president. Maybe you have to go all the way back to Bush Sr. or Reagan or something like that. And I think part of the reason is because he's like, it's a case of, only Nixon can go to China. And that's an argument that I think I made some months ago, is that he has been such an extreme Zionist and has given them everything that they wanted over the years. In his first term, they got Jerusalem, they got the Golan Heights, that he has proved his bona fides. And so there's just no way that he's going to be attacked from the right. Biden, basically did everything that Netanyahu wanted him to do.
But Trump is being attacked from the right now, though.
Okay, well, you're talking about a different kind of right.
Okay,
I guess what I mean is, like, as he's not being attacked from, let's say, the extremist. He can't get any attacks from the extremist Zionist camp, or he's much, much less vulnerable to that because he's demonstrated. So anyway, it just makes it possible for him to occasionally lay down the law and, is make the ceasefire. Netanyahu would rather have gone ahead with the invasion of Gaza City, but I think Trump was able to apply the pressure. Now, the thing is, again, first of all, this is more tactical than anything. It's not like this is, okay, we're going to stop Zionism and the Israel project, the greater Israel project. No, that's going to continue to go ahead. And he did have the support of many people in Israel. The majority wanted the hostages to come home. So there were a lot of things going for him, and he was able to actually to actually tell Netanyahu stop, at least for the time being. And again, I don't think but it's pretty, in the end though, there's two things. It's just, first of all, it is just tactical. And then second of all, it's Trump. We've seen Trump actually kind of leave the plantation in the case of Russia too, right? And it led to a lot of hope. And apparently he had actually adopted some of the Russian positions that, began to understand their position. And for 2 months, he was saying that no ceasefire first. That doesn't make sense. We have to, have a larger peace settlement. He did that for a whole 2 months. And that was, he had left the plantation, and he had, in that sense, kind of adopted the Russian position. And now, of course, it's all over because it's Trump, and he's never going to stick to anything forever. And there are all those people around him that he's appointed that are going to be constantly pressuring him and constantly looking for opportunities to trick him or convince him, that he needs to take the other route. And I think that's what's going to happen here. Okay, yeah, we got the ceasefire. Like we got the first ceasefire. That lasted a couple months, and then it was over, and then he was completely fine with it being broken. I think there's a very good chance. I think he's clearly has invested more in the ceasefire. But nothing's forever with Trump. He just seems to be incapable of really following through and being consistent. And the people around him are consistent, and they're consistently Zionist. And they'll be looking for that moment of weakness, and they'll take advantage of it. And then, the merry-go-round will go back around, and he'll be where he was before, and Netanyahu will break the ceasefire.
Yeah, I think you're giving Trump too much credit and saying that he laid down the law and other presidents may not have. I mean, first of all, we've never been in a situation where Israel has been doing this level of destruction, at least during my lifetime. So I think that's unique. And then I also just think that, you know, you said before, like the Russians had Putin probably had a psychological profile on Trump on how to deal with them. I'm sure the Israelis do too. And they understand, like, we give him a win, make him feel good, inflate him, and that's how you work with him. You let him say he's this great peacemaker, whatever, and then you can just just word vomit at him until you get what you want. Just make him feel good about whatever's happening. He's like, you're great, whatever. And and in the end, it seems like this is great for Israel. They got their hostages back, so Netanyahu gets the domestic problem solved. He can violate the ceasefire whenever. You said that he's going to continue to take land, so he gets to appease the far right extremists as well. And it's just like, it's a win all around for Netanyahu. So I don't feel like Trump really laid down the law. It seems like he just got used, in my opinion. I don't think there's anything.
I can't disagree with you. I suppose it could be interpreted either way, and it maybe is a little bit of both.
I don't want to give him credit.
I understand. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, but this Israel problem, is just it's got to, the chickens have to come home to roost, at least here domestically. It's like the right is splitting apart. This is tearing the right apart, and the left here is, they're good on, for the most part, pretty good on Israel, but the left as well as the political parties pretty much dead. There's
the Democrats are,
the Democrats, right. Yeah, but it's just the whole. It's just something, it's just not right. The system doesn't work. It doesn't serve the people. It doesn't address any of the problems. And we're just constantly being gaslit to the point that everybody's sick. And so I just feel like I don't know if I have a question. I just feel like it's just like something's got to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's just, and again, we're, I think, facing a political crisis, and we're facing it with at a time when the trust in different kinds of political institutions, Congress, the media, whatever, are at all-time lows. There's. I think it's a very rocky road ahead, and this kind of globalist consensus that we've had, globalist Zionist consensus, it's very, very, firm at the top, but its foundations, I think we could say, or at least, maybe that's not the way to look at it. It's just that so many things aren't really built on the people, but this castle is surrounded by an angry crowd, and they may eventually storm it. We'll see.
It's gone to the point is that when anybody is posting like support of Israel, it just they're exposing themselves. It's like, what's going on? Are you have this belief that that you're extreme Christian Zionist or Jewish Zionist, and you believe we're the chosen people, and that the Gazans, the Palestinians, they deserve to die. We have to create greater Israel, rebuild the temple, whatever it is, rapture, apocalypse. Some people are like that, right? Or they're being paid, or they're compromised and corrupted. That's basically what is happening now in social media. So it's like, even if you maybe don't really feel, and you just always grew up and hearing that we support Israel, and you still kind of like reflexively support it, I don't think anybody would actually go out there and enough to post about it, because they know the backlash. So it's just like, everybody that is doing it, it's like now everybody knows who the enemy is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, just as a last comment aside, I saw it was a video clip of Laura Loomer, who was having a nervous breakdown. So she keeps on posting. She's an extremist, of course, and but I guess she is feeling the pressure. You certainly, almost felt sorry for her. Anyway, I think we should switch topics.
Yeah, but just the last thing. I mean, that's exactly what I'm saying. Is like, the more that they go out and say it, it's just so apparent to people. Like when they all coordinated attack Tucker. And that's what made me watch the Nick Fuentes interview. I'm like, why is everybody so angry about this, or so upset with Candace? Just, you gotta shut up. Don't look into this Charlie Kirk assassination. And I'm like, well, now I gotta look into it. It's having the opposite effect. And the more, so there, I don't know. It's just done. Okay, but yeah, let's go ahead and switch to some other stuff. So, what's on your mind other than this?
Yeah, well, I think maybe I wanted to comment further on the Burevestnik this new missile that has been announced by Putin just the other day. More information's come out about it, and it's really quite extraordinary. It's clear that this is not just a major new missile system, but a real technological breakthrough that the Russians achieved, and it's going to have applications, both military and civilian, widespread applications. They managed to miniaturize a nuclear power plant. This is 1,000 times smaller than the kind that is used in nuclear submarines. And that's quite extraordinary. Clearly, there's all kinds of applications that you can think, both peaceful and military.
It's like Iron Man, right? He had a nuclear reactor in his chest. I don't know if you watched that. But
right. It was something that I don't think the Americans thought they could do, but they did. This one area, again, Russia is not a gas station masquerading it as a country, clearly. It's amazing that there's still an effort to try to keep up this very condescending view. I think that, again, that's the narrative that's been established, and the Western hegemonic political class is struggling to maintain it. But this is something else that again undermines it. This is a remarkable technological breakthrough. And with this miniature nuclear power plant, this missile can actually travel, can stay up for days, even weeks at a time.
I've heard even months potentially.
Yeah, I've heard that. I guess, the most recent, very detailed analysis said days or weeks. Weeks could add up to months. Who knows? That just gives the Russians a lot of options that they didn't have. Again, they can strike any place. Well, essentially, it's more than they can strike any place on the globe, but they can strike any place on the globe from any direction that they choose. And follow any path that they want to get there. And they can also put this up there in a situation and have them hovering in different places, off the coast of the U.S. And it gives them, a certain amount, a real deterrence. It's just like the U.S. has got to understand, if we do get to a very tense standoff, okay, they don't have missiles in Cuba, but we don't even know where their missiles are, and they could be anywhere. Again, it flies very low, so it's very difficult to detect by radar. The anti-ballistic, anti-ICBM systems that we have are directed against, ballistic missiles that fly at very high altitudes and are, designed to intercept them at these higher altitudes. For example, the THAAD system, that's one example. And we just simply don't even have really an anti-missile system or radar array that is designed to deal with this kind of missile. So to counter it, let's say just on the defensive side, to at least be able to detect some of them and shoot some of them down, that's going to require a huge investment. No, I think the Russians are hoping, actually back in 2018 when Putin announced these systems, he said they were in development. I think it needs to be pointed out. Again, I think I mentioned that it was really ridiculed at the time, his statement. But he announced, I believe, 5 different systems, and 4 of them have now been successfully developed. One was the Kinzhal, which has been used rather extensively within Ukraine. The other is the Zircon, which has been used several times in Ukraine. A third, was this Burevestnik, and then the Poseidon, which is another system that was announced. That's, I believe it's an underwater drone that is powered by this miniaturized nuclear power plant. And again, this is something that just travel through the world's oceans. And this would be even more impossible. I think this would be even scarier in some ways for the Americans. They just have no idea. They have a fleet out there and they don't even know if it's surrounded by these things.
And they could go forever, if pretty much.
Pretty much, right.
You don't need to be cruising at 500 miles an hour like a cruise missile. Don't need that.
They do actually go approximately that fast. They go faster than that, actually.
But these underwater drones?
Oh, not the underwater drones.
Yeah, I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
I was about to say, Nick, no way. That's
yeah. So anyway, there's so they have developed 4 of the 5 systems that they announced, and they didn't even mention, Putin didn't even mention the Oreshnik, but
I
that's
was going to
something
ask
else
about
that's come
that.
out, right? But that's another, breakthrough new technology that overcomes the are is really impossible for us to defend against. Now, all of these, the research on these started back in the early 2000s because the U.S. pulled out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty. Again, it's just so foolish. Again, I think they had this sense that, yeah, they're just a gas station masquerading as a country. Why do we even have a treaty with them? We'll just go ahead and develop our own weapons. Now here we are looking 25 years later. The Russians have 5, completely new systems that overwhelm our defenses, and we don't have anything new. To my awareness, that nothing that parallels what the Russians have done. So we pulled out of it, and the Russians responded with these new systems. And I believe the hope is that we will restart our strategic arms control talks, but we show no signs of doing that. It just seems like that there's a kind of a brain deadness on our side. That was the reason, really, I think, for Putin's statement back in 2018. It was just like, hey, look, we are doing this, let's talk. And nothing happened then, and nothing's happened now that these systems are actually coming online.
Yeah, Trump was asked that on Air Force One, and his response was like, "Well, it doesn't really matter because we have nuclear submarines, and we can that's our deterrence. They can't be detected, and they're off the coast of Russia." So, is there some truth to that? I mean, at the end of the
Well,
day, I mean,
there is some truth to that. It's like this doesn't completely, change the balance of terror that already existed. But of course, the Russians also have very, very good nuclear submarines, if not superior to the U.S., and that can be off the coast of the U.S. So this is just, this is a further, an additional weapon in that just, that doesn't completely, by itself, I would say, doesn't completely change the deterrence balance that exists at the point, but it does, strengthen the Russian side. It's yet another arrow in their quiver, and that complicates American defenses. You could say, well, let's just focus on strengthening our THAAD and whatever to deal with these ballistic missiles. Well, now you can't just do that. You've got to come up with whole new systems to deal with this whole new threat that is going to come from different directions and at different altitudes. So it does complicate U.S. defenses. It's something to say that, okay, yeah, it's not like it's completely, it's never going to be that way where the Russians just have total dominance and they don't have to worry about any sort of U.S. strike. They always will. There's always going to be a very real chance that some U.S. missiles get through and do horrific damage, with a nuclear weapon. That's always going to be true. But this does change the balance of terror. I mean, they can fire from, they have their land based and their submarine based, and then these also that can be hovering.
just loitering, circling the Arctic or in the Pacific or in the Atlantic. Who knows?
Right.
It's just
Exactly.
yeah, it's crazy. Well, okay. Well, there doesn't seem like there's been much substantive change amongst the Trump administration, at least publicly. They seem to be dismissive of this. But do you think there's some within the Pentagon? I imagine this is sending some shockwaves. Do you think that will lead to some substantive policy change if it works its way up? Be like, hey, we really need to be careful here. We are marching towards nuclear war if we continue this. Like maybe we need to listen to Russia a bit more. Is that breaking through?
Well, you would hope so. The rational response would be to say, okay, let's restart negotiations. We made a mistake back in the early 2000s. We made some very facile assumptions and we were proven wrong. And now, we're in a fix. The Russians have shown a willingness to negotiate. Let's negotiate. That would be the rational thing to do. I think the problem is that you still have this sense of superiority and an unwillingness to recognize Russian strengths. That again, that's really why we're in the Ukraine war. The Russians approached and offered us, negotiations over a new security architecture, and so we can't do that because if actually we really enter into these negotiations, then we're recognizing them as a rival power. I think that's really the thinking that you find among the elites in the foreign policy elites in our country and in the West in general. And this would be the same thing. It's like, oh, but we're going to actually be negotiating from a position of weakness. We can't do that. And I think maybe the more likely response is, well, there's two. One is that there will be billions, if not trillions of dollars, thrown into developing new weapon systems on our side in response. Or it's just we'll pretend that this isn't a problem. It seems to be we'll be like the ostrich with its head in the sand.
Right. Because of the current state of the world, when we hear about the Burevestnik, and it's just all about the military application, just how terrifying we are. But if we get out of this and without any big mushroom clouds, and we can get peace and just enter the multipolar world without a major war, or let's say an expansion of the war, this should be fantastic news. If you think about it, it's like, wow, Russia made a miniature nuclear reactor. That's impressive. That is like the Iron Man thing I was saying.
Mm-hmm.
Just that amount of unlimited power. Think about all the commercial applications that you're saying. Just powering all these industries, all these. Could be anything. Your car or whatever. Your plant or anything. Just so many things. Like that's a fantastic thing. It's something we should celebrate about. And it'd be great for people that want to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels. Like, look, we got these mini nuclear reactors. Instead of buying your backup generator, just like, oh, let me just tinker with the.
Yeah, well, you probably don't want to put it in a car. You could have a car accident with,
Okay, right. I know. But I'm just saying,
but there clearly are, especially in remote, for example, in remote parts of the world, and at very poor and undeveloped places, it's a way to power small, villages, towns, and at an affordable price. Actually, I think that the Russians already, this is one area where the Russians have been very strong. It's not just aerospace, but nuclear technology in general. They are a very major player in like building power plants. We've heard about them in Iran, but it's just all around the world. They do engage in all kinds of cooperative projects with different countries to build power plants. And one thing that they do, that they offer are these, not these super small ones, but very small modular nuclear units that can be set up very quickly and power like a small city or something. And that's and this is again an extension of that. And I think it is something that could benefit humanity. And that's hopefully, that's going to be the consequence of this technological breakthrough, and that we'll never get to the point of nuclear war.
Right. Well, I'll be great to be able to see in the future some commercial applications, but then be like, I remember when that thing first came out, when it was that missile. Hopefully we can get there. But it seems like the U.S. response to these, weapon systems is just to ignore it. We don't hear it in the public. It's the same thing with the Oreshnik. I bet you if you just asked the average American here about the Oreshnik or Burevestnik, they would have no idea, and they don't understand how things have changed. Is that, do you think, just our policy? Doesn't seem like we're going to release anything to
it's kind of like
counter it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Zelensky policy in Ukraine. It's just like, just pretend it's not happening and talk about horrific Russian losses all the time. That seems to be the policy. And it works until it doesn't work. That's what happens. Eventually the reality breaks through, and then people say, well, wait a second, what have you been telling me all these last few years?
Right. Well, it seems to be largely effective. And this Ukraine war, it's always something a bit more difficult, I think, to get people to understand fully the conflict and how dangerous it is. It's easier with Gaza because you can just see the mass civilian loss. It just appeals to your human nature, like, well, this is clearly wrong. It's not so hard. It's a little bit more difficult, I think, with Russia. But where do you see the war going? Do we see any chance that we've talked about the encirclements in Prokros and Kupiansk? Do you see a conclusion anywhere on the horizon, or do you think that based on Trump's recent statements and his stance that we are doubling down and we're going to just keep this fight with Russia going?
Yeah, well, I think so. Unfortunately, I think that's where we are. That's it's just that the thing is doubling down doesn't really mean very much in actual military terms. So it meant a lot more a year ago and even more 2 years ago when we really had a lot to offer the Ukrainians. Now we just don't have much. Again, Trump has shown a reluctance to support Ukraine. He set up this new mechanism whereby the Europeans buy weapons from us. And I think that has slowed things down. I mean, I don't know that the mechanism has, but there has been an clear drop in the number of weapons going to Ukraine. Now, that may be in part because of this new mechanism and the unwillingness or inability of European governments to fund it. And I think that's what's motivating them to essentially steal the Russian assets, because they just don't have money, or maybe they technically have it, but they're already in so much trouble with their own people that, to further tax increases and further debt and whatever is just going to be very unpopular. So they've been reluctant to steal. They've been, like this, I don't know, vultures circling this carcass for a long time, looking at these hundreds of billions of euros of Russian assets. And they've been reluctant because they understand that it is theft, that it can have real consequences in the international financial markets. But I think they're probably going to go for it because they're stuck. Anyway, it's just there has been this drop off. What we're seeing is that there are real hard constraints, both in terms of money and of the weapons. And even if, we had, let's say, we just reverted to the Biden approach and just to send them as everything that we possibly could, and to fund it with our own money to make sure that the weapons get there and we don't have to wait for the Europeans to figure out a way to steal the money. Even so, I think we would have seen a real drop off, even in that case, because the stockpiles have been depleted. That's what the Pentagon is starting to say, and it's clear that's what's going on. We haven't. There's been some effort to ramp up production of different weapon systems, and there has been an increase, but it's not nearly enough. We've gone from maybe 500, let's say, Patriot interceptors a year to 600. We've gone from 15,000 to, 50,000 artillery shells a month. But all of this is still way below what would make a real difference in Ukraine. I guess to some extent it can draw out the conflict, but that's all it can do, and it's not going to reverse the flow. And then the Russians are, while we're slowly ramping up the production, the Russians have been rapidly ramping up production. So for every step that we take, the Russians are taking 3 steps and growing that much stronger. So there's just no question where this is headed.
So that's why we gotta go to war with Venezuela, I guess. That'll solve
Yeah. Well, maybe it could be. It's just we need a clear win somewhere, and
I almost
they think
feel
they
like
can
that's
get it in
what
Venezuela.
I almost feel like that's what it is. It's almost
It could
like
be.
war.
I think
we
it
just
could
need
very
to
well
show
be.
that we have some power because we've just looked pretty pathetic. I mean, we had that incident in the South China Sea just a couple of days ago where we had 2 aircraft off the USS Nimitz just go crashing into the sea. It's like we can't even keep our planes up in the air when we're not fighting,
Yeah.
It's like, and we had 3 F-18s fall off of that thing in the Red Sea and lost 19 Reaper drones, trying to fight the
maybe.
Houthis.
Yeah, I think according to the Houthis, even more than that. But
21 or 27, I forget. But
yeah.
Yeah. What do you think? Just this will be the last. We'll end it pretty soon. But just with Venezuela, do you think this is happening? Because it sounds like Maduro has said that they've caught some CIA operatives basically, and just false flag attempts, and that it sounds like this operation in Venezuela is more of a CIA op than a military op.
Yeah, I think the military operation is still there and will be activated at some point. They're trying to pull off something within the country, again with CIA help. I think that's clear. They would rather do it that way, but it's not working. I think that's what we say. They have attempted for decades to carry out coups in Venezuela. There have been obvious public attempts which have failed, including during the last Trump term. And recently a story came out about how the U.S. was trying to bribe Maduro's pilot over the course of a long period of time, and then he finally told him to go take a hike.
Probably after he took a lot of money first.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. Right. Well, that's what they're saying. So that's why it's all public now. The thing failed. So there's probably dozens of little plots like that, or larger plots going on right now, and they're waiting. The purpose of these of all the ships off the coast and all the planes that have been deployed to places like Puerto Rico is to create pressure, and also, maybe to support some kind of operation. Like once a coup starts, they're going to go in with some kind of supporting strikes. But if none of these things work, all of these different these plots fail, they may just go for a straight out, decapitation strike. It's hard for me to see them actually just turning around and hightailing it out of there. I think that would be too much of a humiliation, and one too close to U.S. territory. It's like, God damn it, we have a right to bully these countries here. That's really, I think, American attitude that goes way back.
Is it bad that I almost want us to do it, because I just feel like this will hasten the end of the empire and let us going back to being a republic? Because I'm just afraid of what's going to happen if we continue our current trajectory with Ukraine, or with her support with Israel, and eventually an attack on Iran. This seems so scary, and I'm just thinking like, well, maybe if we talk about just reality just doesn't seem to hit home for our politicians and for a lot of Americans. This idea of American exceptionalism and supremacy is still firmly embedded. Right. Well, if we go after Venezuela and then it just does not go the way we expect, we lose some aircraft, maybe a ship, something like this, and then the whole thing blows up. It's like, what are we doing? Get out of here. Get out of everywhere. Yeah. Let's end this madness. Let's quit holding the whole world at gunpoint and go back to taking care of our country and our problems, because Lord knows we got enough of them.
Right. Well, all I can say is, I hope it doesn't happen at all. I don't think we can ever ask another country to suffer in order to save us.
I know, but I'm just thinking...
I understand your point of view. But if it comes to that, of course, I hope that the U.S. fails in some obvious way, and that at least potentially, there's no guarantee, potentially it'll have a positive impact and cause people to wake up. It could also just enrage people, the people at the top, and lead to further military operations, unfortunately.
Right. And I just want to also just say, like, I really don't want any American soldiers to die. These are still my countrymen. I don't want war, I don't want this to happen. But and if you are in the military, I just feel like, you have a duty to speak out and say, you joined the military to protect our country. This is not protecting us. This is endangering all of us. This is making us hated. This is just wrong. And so I just hope, I don't want anybody to die. I don't want Americans to die. I don't want Venezuelans to die. I just don't want anyone to die. But we are the instrument of death here around the world. Yeah. It's just...
Well, there are a lot of American military personnel that have figured that out. And I know some of them. And some of them watch our show, it's,
yeah, there's just this reflexive thing in the United States that it's just, no matter what, you have to salute the U.S. military. And it's just like, and if not, then somehow you're a traitor to your country. And it's just like, wait a second, you guys are the traitors for telling us that. And so you can do whatever you want with our military, kill whoever you want, get them killed as well. Like, what the hell were we doing in Iraq, Afghanistan, like everywhere? It's just like Vietnam. It doesn't matter. You just go back, just all these boys that are getting blown up and dying horrific deaths because somehow you told us that they're fighting for our freedom. It's just so it's evil, and then they die and they kill all these other people too,
Yeah.
for what? Their own profit, the hope, the just to keep this empire going that that nobody wants, for Israel, just it's
Yeah.
like, anyways, I don't.
Yeah.
I think we can end it there. If there's anything
Yeah.
else you
No,
want to
I
say.
don't need to add anything to that. That's
Okay.
well
All
said.
right. Okay. Have a good rest of your day, Dad.
Okay. You too.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.